And take it from there. What do you think? Does that work? Okay. So we'll discuss the book. We will discuss the issues that make the book complex. And I have with me the only book club team member with me today, Choitali, Professor Choitali Moitra. I'm really grateful. Otherwise, I think you would all fall asleep by the time the half hour would be over when I chatter on. So, without further ado, this was a difficult one as a book choice. All my book club members wanted to do this because it's a book that speaks not just to the issue of domestic violence or the issue of mental health, and that's why we have Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee here with us today to address the issues that undergird the complexities of violence in a partnership. And in this case, Aisha-Sarwari, who is now the head of Coca-Cola for Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates, felt that she had to write this book. She is actually a product of North American universities, as is her husband, Yasser. And he's from Rutgers. She's from one of the universities on the West Coast. And if you look her up, Google her, or get her on the YouTube search, you will find that she's done a heck of a lot against human trafficking, the trafficking of women, and apart from the corporate hat that she wears, she also wears the hat for NGOs, for women's causes, and she is currently the hottest new storyteller in the realm of feminist memoirs. So don't be surprised if you see her grab, a couple of honors in the next year, because this book is a very new book. And it was just by chance that I managed to hook up with her through a student of mine, a Pakistani student, Mavra Bari, who was from the University of Toronto, and we never lost touch. She was one of the sharpest knives in the drawer at the university. And she said, well, you're looking for feminist writers. Why don't you talk to Aisha-Sarwari? So when I got through to Sarwari, it seemed she was very gracious, but very trenchant in the interview I had, and obviously is a name to reckon with in Pakistan. So when I mooted the title of the book and the book to the members of the book club, of the Bengal Club, it appeared to me that there was a lot of interest in the complexity of why write a memoir at this age. I think she's been in this marriage for about 30 years. And what is it about this memoir that makes it a puzzle for readers as well as must be for herself? Because even though she went through, literally through some truly explosive head-on collisions with her partner, who at that time apparently, when she was getting married, without knowing, he was developing a brain tumor. And it was for years after that, that this behavior went on. And there is no evidence of sympathy for the self or a kind of, prioritizing, ooh, me, victim, none of that. It's a very well-written memoir. Would you agree, Choitali, that because there is no color to it of the self? But, so why don't we do this? Since Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee's time is precious, and we are grateful that he's here. Shondeep, would you like to open the floor Sorry? Oh, what I think is interesting is that till the very end, she says she loves him to death, even after writing this memoir. And look at the strategic planning, I would say. You can't get away from the fact that Yasser has written the foreword. Yasser has written a foreword where he apologizes profusely that this is what he did, and he is grateful that his wife of so many years stood up, got the family going, earned the family bread on the table while he was getting his act together. So I think there are many issues here. This is not just a book about domestic violence. This is a book about what women all over the world suffer. This is not culture specific, and this is the point that I wanted to make even before, hopefully, our author joins us. In my few years that I had the time to serve as a volunteer in the Asian context of women who were battered as immigrants in Toronto, when I worked at the University of Toronto, there were some hours that I gave to learning really what are the problems. And I was amazed that it has nothing to do with Islamic societies. It has everything to do with a global phenomenon where you had Cambodians, you had Vietnamese, you had people from Serbia, Herzegovina, going to Toronto and trying to find a way in which the men would feel equally empowered as women in the family. And the domestic violence that ensued in all these communities that I found was due to the fact that women, immigrants, acculturated quicker than men. Probably because men felt a little reserved to say that they didn't know the language. Language was a huge reason. But as we will see in the ongoing discussion, the first point is, of course, that it is not culture specific, this kind of violence. The second point is that both these people had the privilege of the contextual global education. So despite that, what is it that makes people, some people, veer towards violence as a part of their character? So these are questions, and does the, does the proclivity of having a brain tumor and the operations which are necessary to remove the cancerous growth in the brain, do they remove some of the brain tissues as well, which cause the behavioral flux? So with that opening, Shondeep, do let us know when you're ready to say a few words. In the meantime, Choitali and I will start the conversation and see where it goes. So we're all on an adventure trip. Do feel free to jump in whenever you want, because it really is a kind of memoir I have not read before, and I think Choitali and I have had a discussion, 6 of the other members. One member of ours, Anasuya, has sent a video. We'll watch that in a minute. But Choitali and I feel that it really is a different kind of memoir. So, Choitali, first question, when you began to read heart tantrums, heart tremors or tantrums as Aisha puts it, what was your level of amazement? What really took you by surprise?
Like every month we try to read a book for this meet, where we have so many friends coming in and sharing their opinions. So Julie Dee sends us the PDF, and I started reading, thinking of this particular evening, and for the first 50 or 100 pages, I was clearly annoyed. Annoyed because a woman was suffering, annoyed because so many unusual things happen in life where relationships get mauled forever, with the brain tumor coming in. And then after that, when I got into the thick of the book, I realized that it is not just the man and the wife. The tumor itself is a character. Dr. Chatterjee must enlighten us on this, but I thought that this tumor was both qualifying and disqualifying the relationship of Yasser and the protagonist of the novel, of Aisha-Sarwari. That was the first feeling. Then gradually, when I kept on reading, I felt that there were so many other presences in the book, especially the contrast between Pakistan and America. The unusual efficiency that you see in the social lifestyle of America, and the inefficiency that becomes evident in the book when Pakistan is described in different corners and perspectives. That was important. I also felt that apart from the violence that you see here, that the wife suffers, there are other emotional vacuum also. She lost her father. Maybe that created a hollow in her, which has both a sort of, which gives to her memoir a filial perspective and a conjugal perspective from two sides. So these are some of the thoughts that did cross my mind. And also books which, I'm a Bengali, which we sort of grow up with, like Amar Jibon by Rasasundari Devi, the book by Noti Binodini, Pratibha Bosu, Ashapurna Devi, all Bengali books talk of the same type of suffering. The only difference, the silver lining here, is that the book ends in a very non-gender specific way. It doesn't have a gender. It talks about human beings. It talks about how two human beings can sort of be juxtaposed. When I say this, I would like to sort of corroborate my point by saying that maybe, Julie Dee, if it makes sense to just mention the contradictory consciousness of Gramsci, where there is a sort of need for hegemony, which goes to the extent of just not remaining limited within individuals in the novel, and it speaks beyond the covers.
Absolutely. And I think Choitali has done a very interesting job invoking Gramsci, because the theorist was very specific in telling us that whether it's a state or whether it's patriarchy, the way that the state or the patriarchy persuades the individual it is trying to influence becomes the heart of the matter. And here is what is in the book, and I want to read a little bit to again buttress Choitali's point. So, Sarwari's crafting of scenes that wins her the award for having the perceptiveness of a playwright. We just need to hear her language. I quote, "In the aftermath of what had happened, I found it very hard to tell whether I should go to the police or to the neurologist. Control trumps over everything, even the saving of a life. Rutger's red t-shirt, soft like candy floss, came apart in my hands." The whole fight that keeps being reiterated in this story is when she wears her husband's t-shirt to come to bed on a cold winter's night, and he just flips. They were cuddling together. The next minute, he just turns purple and he says, "Take that off, that's my shirt." And she says, "What's with the shirt? I'm wearing it, it's cold. I'll take it off tomorrow morning." And that is the beginning of the rain of blows that happens. And he manages to keep up this till she's thrown off the bed, full of blood and gore, and the next thing she knows is her tooth coming off and rolling on the floor. And the chapter ends with shame, shame, shame. So, to hone in on the point about the chauvinism and the masculinist domination, this happened again and again and again. But when I asked her in an interview for The Telegraph about 3 months or 4 months ago, I was first struck by the fact that I said, you are a woman not from the backwoods. You are a woman of university education in America. Why didn't you just walk out? What made you stay? And her answer was, I wish I knew what it was. But the fact that keeps coming back to me is what she said afterwards. She loved him to death. She literally did. So this might be a good time, Shondeep, to tell us what your feelings are about the clinical side of things. Would you agree when the author says that I lived with the tumor and with Yasser? Are they different, one and the same? Here you go.
It's very difficult for a professor of English to understand how difficult it is for a professor of neurosurgery to read a book in 5 days and then talk about it. It's even more difficult for a professor of English to understand how difficult it is for a professor of neurosurgery to leave his office at 5 p.m. because he has to attend a book club meet. And even more difficult for her to understand what explanation he gives his patients as to why the appointment is cancelled. Doctor is going to speak in a book club meet. The point I say this is because, like Einstein said in his special theory of relativity, there are events that occur on the surface of the planet that are viewed by two individuals who have completely different interpretations of the same event. And nowhere is it more subtly demonstrated than in the relationship of Aisha with her husband. Because the same event is perceived in a completely different way by two individuals. And I think this is a point that you perhaps didn't make, but I felt very strongly when I went through the first part of the book. The other thing is, and I've been asked specifically to talk about the brain tumor angle, is I think the book raises a lot of fundamental questions. You just heard Julie tell you about one such question, which was when her husband resorted to this violent methods, was the answer to go to consult her brain surgeon, or was it to go to the police? She doesn't leave you with an answer. She leaves you with the question. The other thing is, and I felt this reading through the book, was the brain tumor the substrate for the violent behavior, or was it a subterfuge for the wild and violent behavior? And we know that certainly from a medical point of view, that brain tumors can affect your behavior. But the sort of behavior that we read about in this book from her husband, the tantrums, the violence, the extreme violence is, difficult to justify or difficult to blame on the brain tumor itself. because the brain is an amazing organ. And if you really think about it, if the reason why you get this is not because a part of your brain has stopped working, but you have this behavior because certain inhibition centers in your brain have stopped working. So in other words, when you just feel very angry because your partner's wearing your shirt, you heard that story because that was really one of the things she highlights in her narrative. You feel that this is a grievous hurt and you should sort of strangle her to death, you should physically maul her, you should hit her, and that's what he does. But this lack of inhibition, I think, is difficult from a purely medical point of view to blame only on the tumor. So that's why I said it's not only a substrate, it's also a subterfuge. And I think this point, though Aisha never says this anywhere in the book, I think there's a lot of hints where she feels, is it only the brain tumor? Or can it only be the brain tumor? And I think the answer is definitely no, it cannot only be the brain tumor. So, the other thing is, which I found, again, very interesting psychological reaction, was the spirit of tolerance that she exhibits throughout the book. Yes. Given her background, given her exposure to the Western world, she seems to almost suggest that the prototype of an Asian woman is to be tolerant to whatever your husband does and to accept everything. And this acceptance and tolerance seems to almost assume in the book virtues with which she has endowed upon herself. And I found that very difficult to come to terms with for somebody with her sort of background. So I won't say very much more. I think I've spoken more than the 5 minutes I was asked to speak.
That was very enlightening. We have a few questions, but my other question to you would be that this is almost as if when you see Yasser's relationship with his friends who become his enemies, does he definitely not have an anger management issue here?
Yeah, but if you read the foreword, you will see how he talks about domestic violence as something he's been exposed to from his parents.
Yes, yes.
And he mentions that very early in the book, very early in the foreword. Yeah. So there is clearly a certain amount of this reaction that has occurred subconsciously in his mind, because he talks about his teenage life when he's witnessed domestic violence between his parents.
One of your colleagues in the US, who also speaks about what she calls now, in our theoretical parlance, as post-memory. And Yasser seems to be fitting into that sort of module, where the trauma that is perpetrated by his father on his mother is a mantle that he takes on, but although he admits it, Shondeep, he doesn't seem to want to change that, or he's in denial.
Yes, that is possibly true, but you have to also understand that the fact that this sort of events occurring in a teenage life lead a permanent stamp on your brain and your mind from which it is difficult to use logic or science to get out of. And superimposed on that, if you actually have some brain inhibition loss which is caused by a brain tumor that you're suffering from, and you put 2 and 2 together, then you probably understand a lot of his behavior. And the fact that even at the end of the day, he does have remorse. He does exhibit remorse. Even in the foreword, he tells you that he talks about a mirror of his life where he sees lots of things that he didn't want to see in a mirror, you know. So I think the psychological impact of a teenage brain growing up together with the effect of a brain tumor, I'm not defending his behavior, but these are issues that one, I think, clearly has influenced his behavior that you read in the narrative.
And as far as Aisha is concerned, I think as a neurophysician, neurosurgeon, it's worth looking at the fact that here is a woman who is a fighter. She, against all odds, she survives. She's a survivor, and she works hard to put that bread on the table for her 2 kids. But in your experience, and how you read this, what would you like to say about Aisha as a non-victim oblique woman who's empowered with, as you said right in the beginning, with oodles and oodles of patience, which...
Yeah, I mean, that is the most surprising thing about her. Given everything, you would expect her to stand up and revolt. But she doesn't. She talks about her husband having, and she mentions the words obsessive compulsive disorder. It almost makes you feel at the end that she also has an obsessive compulsive disorder to accept everything in the interest of a larger family. And she wants everything running as normally, in inverted commas, as possible. And I really at the end thought, who was the one who had more obsessive compulsive disorder in that book?
One more question from me, and then I'll turn it over to Choitali. I want us to go back to Aisha, and it never seems to stop befuddling me as to how she feels that she is not wanted by her family, and this doubly, triply homeless, diasporic life of being born in India, and the book really has a lot of angst against our kind of looking at politics and how they worship Jinnah, quite rightly in their...
Yeah, she talks about Indians in the US bullying the people in Pakistan.
Yes.
Was one of the causes for her Pakistan nationalism to rise.
Absolutely. So my question to you is, did some of this disempowerment within her come from the fact that she was in Uganda, she was kicked out of there, she came back to Pakistan, went to study in the US, didn't make much there, came back to Pakistan. Do you think this constant feeling of not being accepted, not being wanted, made her want to cling on to
I think there's a lot of that in the book. The fact that she feels that there was no place that really wanted her, and that she had to be constantly on the move to survive, literally. And I think that is quite amply obvious that she never really felt comfortable in the US, definitely not in Uganda, and if you read about her, neither in Pakistan. And she really felt that that none of these places had done justice to her. And I think that it does come out in the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, to continue the discussion after Dr. Chatterjee's very, very illuminating points, I would just like to add that there is a difference between respect and love that the book tries to show, and I don't think any definition is enough for the tolerance level that is seen in the novel, and the way the physical sort of injury is described. Julie described one incident. The other incident, which people who know the book would probably recall, is where her eye, one of the eyes go sort of bloodshot and brown, and she's still not ready to go to the doctor. She does, but with a lot of guilt, as if it is her fault. So that also brings to mind how she I don't know really whether she respects marriage as an institution, or she wants to make marriage a sort of workable marriage as a part of her identity to go to the corporate world. That is an issue which can definitely be discussed in detail.
We will open it up in a little while. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Mavra. The person who's responsible for getting us on this trip today. Mavra, is Aisha around?
She has not joined yet, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure she'll join soon. I'm really sorry about this. Her phone, yeah, she did confirm that she would be joining, but her phone is off. So let's see. I think she'll join in a bit, perhaps.
Wonderful.
Maybe she mixed the time difference. Let's
Wonderful.
see.
Mavra, we've been talking about a lot of the book. I don't think did you get to hear some of it from Dr. Shundeep Chatterjee?
Yeah.
A
Yes,
neurosurgeon.
yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So,
I did.
Mavra is the young lady who was in my class at the University of Toronto, the sharpest knife in the drawer, possibly. Mavra, we'll wait for Aisha to come in. And before that, Vinod, hi. Vinod is one of our very supportive book club members. So, Vinod, will you give us your, sign on the book and tell us what you think?
Sure.
Okay. So,
Right,
Mavra, give us a heads up when Aisha comes in. Okay, thanks.
Before I begin, I must say that I haven't read the full book. I have read, part 1 and part 2, which is about half the book. But that itself is, it leaves very strong impressions and it's pretty thought-provoking. What I felt here was, a few things struck me. One was that it's a very balanced book, because you have the husband talking, with a lot of remorse at this stage, and for him to write the foreword, I thought that was, that's pretty unusual, because the book itself is very candid, and there's so much written about him that I don't know how that man could write the foreword, and that's great also. As for Aisha, I think this book has got such a lot of honesty about it. I don't know who will be able to write like that. People write memoirs, but you really live through her life. You experience it. The first part where she is struggling there with her husband's disease and his irrational behavior. You feel very sad, and you get drawn into it as though you're existing there. And then later, when it shifts to Uganda and Kenya, there again, you just go through what a small girl, growing up, what she would go through. So it's very beautifully written, very powerful writing, the way she's done. And she's pretty balanced. She's not just trying to portray as though she was in the right completely and this man was like that. She's pretty balanced in the way she is presenting things. What struck me also was something very strange, that like the husband was, he had a troubled childhood, and in a way he's behaving in the same way. So I've often found that what happens to us in our childhood, that's where we pick up, we model, we know how the father behaves, the mother behaves. That becomes the model on which we start. That's a model that we use when we go out into the external world. And then, so, our bosses and our brothers and sisters become our peers. And so we literally replicate the whole thing unless we become very aware and start, thinking it through and start processing the experiences that we've been through. And while on the one hand that is happening with him, on the other hand the same thing is happening with Aisha. She's exactly doing what her mother was. And to an extent, she's slightly different, but it's the same thing playing through. Her father too was, insensitive to what his wife was, going through, and she bore it up very gladly, So the same thing is happening here. So to that extent, it explains, and there's a great deal of honesty there, the way she's writing. I mean, I could go on and on. Also, I found a big difference between the way part 1 is written and part 2. It's as though two different writers have written it. I don't know, the whole flavor, the language, everything changes. The first one is, something that excites you, disturbs you, while the second is very beautiful and, you want to, just sort of, although there are some incidents that could disturb, but it doesn't do that. So there's something that was, I felt, I've not thought through why it's so, but that's the experience I was left with. As I said, I haven't read the third part. I couldn't get the time to finish it before this book club. But for now, I think that's what I can come up with, Julie.
Thank you, Vinod. That was
thank you so much.
That was very rich, and it echoed what Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee told us about this idea that has really come up again and again post-Holocaust and genocide all over the world, the idea of post-memory. In trauma, the second and third generation imbibe that. So I think it's very well taken. Ruma Sen is there.
Yes. Yes.
Ruma, thank you for coming in. And do I see Aisha there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm really sorry for joining a little late. I had some link issues.
It is a huge honor. Thank you so much for coming in, Aisha. I know you've been busy, and I thought we'd catch you off guard, perhaps in Turkey, but Mavra has made it happen again, and thanks to you both. On behalf of the Bengal Club, the Library Subcommittee, and the Bengal Club itself, we are so honored that you're here. So, before any mishap of a tone connection, may we ask you to talk to us a little bit about, I think, what my colleague here, Dr. Choitali Moitro, and the audience would like to know. What made you write this wonderful, explosive, full of honesty and passion? What made you think about writing this memoir?
Let me just start by saying thank you so much, Julie, for having me over at the Bengal Book Club. I have had it in my calendar for the longest time. I feel a bit of a pseudo-intellectual being here with such learned people. And the gentleman who was speaking before you, I'm not sure what his name was, but I think he was aptly putting the book into the right category that it is. It is this splitness of part 1, part 2. And if there's anybody who knows trauma or trauma writing, it is that it leaves you without a sense of self. And so to the short answer of your question is, I wrote it to kind of create a self. After something bad happens to you, after you're put through pain, and after you've been put through humiliation, I don't think that is the biggest tragedy or the pain. The real pain is, how does your community or how do your people react to the pain that you've been put through? And I think that my loss of self happened in the reaction to the pain that I was put through, which was general erasure, general neglect, general get over it, general it happens, the normalization of something that I don't think should have been normalized. And I think in that, because it didn't happen once or twice, it happened over years, it did wear me down to a point where I do not know when I'm happy and I do not know when I'm sad. And I have to check the rule book of whether some situation should make me happy or sad. And so I think that the book was, in a way, testimony that it wasn't okay. Like, something inside me told me that what happened to me wasn't okay, and the way people reacted to me wasn't okay. And it was almost like this place in every story where the protagonist, deals with external situations and then one day just decides to pick up either the sword or the pen and point to the perpetrator and tell it as it happened. But in my case, what is really different, and I think you asked me this question where you said, why did I behave like such a rural woman? I'm educated in the US and I have the vocabulary of feminism and all of that. And the answer that I gave you is that I behave like a rural woman because you can be empowered and then that power can be taken back from you. So I think that in that way, I talked about the power I didn't have, I talked about the power that was given to me, and I talked about how it was taken and who took it away.
So before I turn the mic over to my compatriot, my colleague here, Aisha, I'm going to ask you a tough question. And you're welcome not to want to answer it. But if you answer it, I think we'd all gain a tremendous insight into the why. So let me ask it this way. If you had to do things differently in your situation, would you do anything differently if you had this life to live again?
I think it depends on the state that I'm in. And again, I'll go back to what the wonderful gentleman before you was saying, that, there's these parts to me, there's this compartmentalization that I do, in which there's still a part of me that is the victim, right? I mean, suddenly you don't, just because you've written about everything in your memoir, suddenly it doesn't become, you're not all healed. It's not a post. I mean, I'm still the same person that allowed something bad to happen to me. And therefore, there are parts of the victim in me. But there are also parts of the hero in me. And there are also parts of the perpetrator in me. So really, it depends on, this is the chasm that mental health creates is exactly this, that there will be days in which I will wake up and I will feel completely powerless. And there will be days in which I wake up and I'll feel very powerful and I'll feel like I can beat the system. And there will be days in which I want to go back in time and reverse everything. But then there are days that give me something that, the growth that I've had, for example, the children that I've had, the sense of community that I've had, just the fact that we are here today having a conversation, for me as a brown girl, half Kokni community, half Pakistani, to come out and call out the institution of marriage and put it on a trial, I think is unheard of, right? Nobody in my family has ever done it, and we're the product of our social and material conditions. And so I feel that I go through so many waves of being the good bahu, being the good daughter, being the good mother, being the good wife, being the good caregiver. And there is a part of me that wants to win at it all, right? Because that's the sort of parchi we're given when we marry, that do not come back until you ace it all, right? Come back dead or don't come back. And in so many ways, I have tried to ace it all. And I did everything traditionally, right? I mean, I did everything that was needed for me traditionally, and I failed. And that is what I want to call out, it's not enough. The rule book that they give you is not enough. You need to burn it, you need to trash it. And women like us who are in between these two generations, for example, with my mother's generation, where there was so much passivity and it helped her to be passive. And then my current generation of my friends and family who don't take bullshit from anyone, in 1 month they're out. And here I am in between these two, trying to just survive. So the short answer again, and a wonderful question, is it depends on it depends on my mental health. There are days where I feel I can conquer anything, and there are days in which everything has conquered me. So yes and no.
So want to welcome our past president of the Bengal Club, Mr. Kunal Sen. Welcome, Kunal. You've graced us and we are so honored. Thank you. And
Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Professor Choitali Moitro, fire your question.
It's, I think I'm singularly honored today, madam, to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I would just like to ask you a very, shall I say, a difficult question. The tolerance that we find in your memoir is just unbelievable. My question is, would you like to link up any bit of your upbringing with this tolerance? Where did you learn this? Do you think not religion, also to you all, but religiosity, did that have an element in building up the best part of you, which has made to stay on to this marriage and add to your identity of what you are today, madam?
First of all, may I have the audacity to compliment your wonderful sari? Is that a sari you're wearing? It's absolutely gorgeous. I can't focus on anything except it. So that's beautiful. And yes, to your question, I think that the only framework in which brown girls are raised, particularly Muslim girls from South Asia, are raised with is religion. That do it because God forbids this, and do it because God wants you to do this. And then there's this hierarchy of God, your father, your husband, maybe before that your brothers, and that's it. That's the hierarchy. That's the altar in which you have to bow down. I still don't question it, because I still haven't been able, I've been able to shed so much, but I haven't been able to shed that linearity, because my father died early and I've always been looking for a father figure. And you know, that does a number on you, the absence of a father, because the one thing South Asian parents are supposed to do is protect you from mean people, right? And so the moment your father dies and there are mean people in the world, you're on your own. And I think that everybody tries their best, but you know, it's considered to be unfortunate if you are in the world and somebody does something that is horrific to you and that you don't have a father. I've always felt and maintained that the best way to honor my dad is to, now here's where identity comes in, is to come back to Pakistan and serve my country and raise Pakistani children, and a lot of that very patriarchal understanding of how to be a good daughter, okay? Now, I know that that is a bit messed up, and even for somebody listening to this, they might be like, you know, just go to therapy. But truly, you know, I think the word for it is bardasht and tolerance. It does come from my spiritual upbringing. And now that what I explained to you before is perhaps a very basic understanding of it, but I'll tell you what I believe in. I believe that there's a certain diversity or a cognitive diversity that God wants us to have in the world, in which sometimes there are children born on the spectrum, sometimes they're high functioning, sometimes they're low functioning. And I think that it is the community's job to integrate and mainstream them, okay? Now, I can argue the opposite, because my lived experience has been that I have been burned by being a caregiver of somebody who should not have been mainstreamed, okay? But I do believe that as long as I wasn't alone, this was going to be a good thing to do. But I was alone. And the problem with you know, integrating people with challenging mental health disorders or traumatic brain injury or any personality disorder is that you cannot leave the caregiver alone. So sometimes a man has a knee of surgery and it's the woman that is having to bear the worst sort of behavior from this man because it's normalized. In my case, it was a brain tumor, which meant that not only I had to deal with the fallout of whatever brown women have to deal with when the man has a man flu or a knee surgery or a brain tumor surgery, but I had to deal with absorbing the entire community's blame of everything that ever went wrong. So my problem isn't with the day-to-day normality of how a sick person turns on his caregiver. My problem is with the way the society reacted to that while watching it. And that I think is unforgivable. So I did something through the purity of whatever spiritual upbringing I had, which is that time equalizes everything, which is that other people who don't have anybody in their life to support them, you should be around them, because I apparently had something more to give in terms of mental health than he had. And so what I was trying to do was be the giver when I had more, until I realized that I was actually mentally sicker than him. And I think the book is very honest in how much sanity I lost and how much humanity I lost. And if there's one thesis to this book, it is that self-harm, there's a big difference between compassion and self-harm. And I think I stayed in self-harm for a very long time because everything around me told me that it was the honorable thing to do. And I think that is what I'd like to challenge.
Enlightening and reassuring, madam. What you have said brings honest tears to the eyes of many women. Thank you so much.
As I always say, Aisha, as Choitali has pointed out, after reading this memoir, there is no doubt in my mind, and Mavra will, vouch for this. Those of us who saw the immigrant struggle in a place like Toronto, where Mavra was my student, we saw that it's not culture specific. This kind of patriarchy or masculinist or, the domination aspects. It was right across the board. So you're quite right. It's a global issue. It's not just to do with one community or the other. So I'm going to open this up to the floor because I'm sure there are people dying to ask you questions. And then we'll come back and we have a few more little things to ask you. Do you have about 20 minutes, Aisha?
I blocked 4 hours from this point onwards, so all yours.
Okay, wonderful. Professor Arundhati, Ray, please.
This was very honest, whatever I heard. But at the end of the day, I would like to question, why do women feel it is necessary to adjust in the ways that have been described? What lures you to do that? Thank you.
I think love, and it's very shameful and embarrassing to admit this, right? Because we are self-sufficient, we have a certain amount of smarts, we should be able to generate that from everything. But I think that for me and my husband, it was really, when it started off, we forget that I knew my husband Yasser before he became sick. And so I had a glimpse of the core of this man, this young boy who had values and principles and lived by them and loved me in such an incredibly pure way. And so the tumor is approximately 19, 20 years old, and that is where, maybe a year or two later, I saw that decline happen. I couldn't fathom what it is. So I think I endured because I had a doubt that this was not him, right? And it's a complicated science of why women don't leave, because there's multiple things happening there. A, you do seek a certain amount of validation from the person that you love and care about while they are not hurting you, and that's only natural. Then there is the pathological part of it, where you seek validation and need love from the person who's hurt you when they're not in their right state of mind, when they are harming you, and we call that Stockholm syndrome, and it presents itself in exactly this way. Somebody should be smarter enough to outdo it, but most people are not. And lastly, I think what you do wait for is that you're hopeful that you will make sense of the chaos. And if you can make sense of the chaos, you can make sense of anything, you can endure it. So in a way, when I saw that CT scan and I saw this golf-sized tumor in his brain, it all made sense. The chaos made sense, the transformation made sense. And we also have to remember that in his lucid moments, he's exactly like that boy in Sanskrit, right? So I have firsthand evidence of the fact that this is a a physical, a chemical challenge. And if you read the book, it is the reason my book is different from any other Me Too book is because Yasser has written that forward, saying what he said, saying that, it could have been the tumor, but I don't know. It could have been misogyny. And, so this is a brown man, not telling me I'm a liar, not telling me my story doesn't count, not telling me that I didn't endure what I endured. He's actually saying that there's a very good chance that the way I was brought up normalized what I did to you. It's a mea culpa in that sense. And I think that at the end of the day, outside of Bollywood, this is some sort of love. Because, first of all, let me clarify that love cannot exist where violence exists. And disrespect is the most important and the landmark of violence. So there have been times where love hasn't existed. But if I look and stretch time, I will see that it is a version of it, and the Greeks have so many words for love. Pity is one of them, care is one of them. There are multiple facets, and in Bengali or Urdu or Persian, there are multiple facets of love. So in a way, I endured it because I think there is something there that is like love, and I seek it, and it's not. I'm not proud of it. Okay, I wish I was simple enough to kind of walk away from something that didn't make sense and go towards something that made sense, but I'm not there yet, if I can say that.
Very touching, very poignant. Aisha, I think it hits the nail for many of us. On the one hand, love and violence, really? Can they live together? And on the other hand, you quite honestly, with great veracity and belief, say that, well, I do believe that I love him so much, I'm still here. So I'll pass it on to Professor Madhu Chanda Roy Chowdhury, avid reader usually, but I don't know how much of the book she's read. But I'm sure she's followed what we've been saying. So let's see what Madhu Chanda has to say.
It's an honor, absolute honor to listen to you. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time to read the book, but I have been listening to the discussion. What really struck me was how you said that writing the book gave you a sense of identity. And in many ways, all our identities are narratives, aren't they? Because our sense of self is built around the stories that we are told and that we tell ourselves. So I was wondering if you've talked about your fractured self. So has writing the book enabled you to come to a coherent sense of self, or is it still fractured? And secondly, if there is a coherent sense of self, how has the stories that you were told and the self that formed, and how has this self, how are they different perhaps?
Madhuji, that's quite a poignant question. Thank you so much. I'm honored that you asked it. And it's a part of the book that very few people focus on. Everybody, I think, gets so overwhelmed by the sense of violence that it becomes a bit hard for them to go past it. But if you think about it, Yasser is home for me, and Pakistan is home for me. And those two things tend to merge for the reason that I wasn't allowed an identity until my 19, 20 years, until I met him. And let's talk about the multiple identities I have held. So my mother's side of the family is Konkani Muslim. Near Goa, there's Konkan. They speak Konkani. After my father's death, I was moved there, and I kind of was raised by them, by that community. I wasn't really a Konkani, although I tried to be one for a little while, but I think the community spit me out. Then let's talk about who I was before that. I was in Africa, Uganda particularly. And we all know about expatriate communities and how they go to a new country and then they can become so wedded to their original identity that their original home country has made progress, but they stay 70, 80 years behind. So in Uganda, there was the Pakistan Society, which my dad was the president of, and I grew up listening to a lot of I mean, I kind of knew Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah's speeches by heart. I knew Iqbal's speeches by heart. So I was, their little thing to do all of these political works. Now, I was a very political child without knowing it, right? And what were the things that I was fed on? This concept of freedom, this concept of, self-determination. And, the Pakistanis, Indians, and Bangladeshis, particularly in Uganda, were this very united cohort because they had a common enemy. And that common enemy was Idi Amin's Uganda, where they wanted to shoot any Asian on sight because they felt that they took their jobs, they took their mercantilism, etc. Now, that is the environment in which I grew, where I did not see any hostility, right, in terms of countries' dynamics. It was like subcontinent went through several partitions up to 71, and now we are figuring it all out and we are in this together. It was quite a nicely utopian thing, as utopians are in other places. But that was the only time I belonged. And that was the only time that the other identities did not tell me that I needed to explain myself. Everywhere else in the world, I have to immediately explain myself of why Pakistan needed to be created, why it couldn't have been a united India, kya maut padi thi, why did you not do this? And then, of course, you were so terrible about it, you lost Bangladesh. And so all of those sort of like, sort of like a stripping away of identity about why can't I just grew up in Uganda and I just happen to have a Pakistani passport. My father happens to be of Pakistani origin. Why can't that be enough? The moment I went from, a very small village in Uganda to Kenya to the United States, suddenly that questioning became higher and harder. And I guess African Americans in the US or generally any minority community feel that hostility. They walk into a room, they have to explain themselves. They have to say, I'm not a murderer, I don't want your land, all of those. So I felt that very terribly after my father's death. And I associated that, that minority insult based on the fact that my father left at the same time. So you see, when I was in my 20s and I had met Yasser, and let's talk a little about Yasser. I've caricatured him as the person who had that mental health challenge, but let me just tell you before all of it happened, how was he? Yasser was a very articulate young Pakistani man who felt in his 20s that he didn't need to do any explaining to anyone. He was at Rutgers University, and obviously at the same time, he also had those questions asked of him, as in, why did Pakistan have to be created? There was this push for him to merge into the Arab identity. So we either Indian or we Arab. Pakistan identity as it is, it has no feet to stand on. And he really resisted that with something that was very scholaristic. I mean, he had studied Ataturk and secular dynamics. He had studied the entire subcontinent politics. He understood Ambedkar, he understood all of these people's fight for the underdog, right? And that was superbly impressive. I found that there are alternate ways to deal with your identity, no matter what the external situation, that you could actually stand by in your own shoes for your identity, regardless of what the world felt, and that you don't need to do any explaining to anyone. Now, having said that, it was a direct fit, right? I mean, I lost my father, I lost my identity, I had a hostile situation. Here was a Pakistani who was secure in his identity, understood, Jinnah's need for a secular Pakistan, understood South Asian politics. Again, it reminded me of that utopia in Uganda where people just coexisted for the only reason that they exist. And that was enough. And I think that nothing has changed on that front. He is still that person. His politics, because his brain tumor was on his personality side, it impacted behavior and maybe the amygdala hijack, as we call, but it did not impact his cognition. So he's been churning books after books on Jinnah. His scholarship and his scholaristic understanding of that area is beyond par, and because he has a bit of a genius in him, it is very easy to be wowed by that, and I feel safe in that sense of identity, and I've brought my kids up in that safety as well, where we don't need to choose a side, to just be comfortable in the fact that we have this identity, and that part is untainted, and it's beautiful. I hope that helps explain.
I don't think anyone could have explicated this better. Thank you for that, Aisha. Harish,
Thank
would you
you.
like to say a few words? This is Dr. Harish Mehta. He's a historian. And let's see what a historian has to pose to you.
I'd like to congratulate you, Aisha. Now, I read your book, parts of it, a few months ago when Julie was writing the review. And a thought occurred to me then that, when you were thinking about writing a book and getting it out of your system, did you not ever think of fictionalizing it, to sort of hide behind fiction, perhaps an element of magic realism? So that's a question. And the comment is that, in my explorations of womanhood in Latin America and the hegemonies that the American colonizer, when colonizing the Latin American world, the hegemonies went on these lines that we, the gringo, the Yankee, is now arriving across the continent of Latin America to liberate the Latin American woman from the depredations of the Latino man. So where they were going with this is that we are going to take your country because you made a mess of it. You made a mess of your balance of payment, your exchequer, and we take charge of your customs houses and your tax revenues, that whole model of American seizure of all the Caribbean states. But then they work the woman, the Latino woman, as a damsel in distress awaiting rescue by the Anglo-Saxon male, because the Latino male had mistreated her. I just wanted to see, in your own world, was there ever such a paradigm? Do you think that you fitted into any of this at all?
Netaji, that's such a fantastic question, which reminds me to please stick around with more intelligent people next time. I'm currently just viewing a lot of cat videos on Instagram, and you're the kind of people I need to hang out with more. Yes, I initially, first of all, let's just say that I couldn't write this book on so many counts. I couldn't write it because I wasn't healed. And it's not because I was re-traumatizing myself with the writing. The second reason I couldn't write it is because I'm not a writer. I dabble in writing, but I have dyslexia. I've never read the classics. I'm not the intellectual with the right framework, neither the gender framework, nor the post-colonial framework. And the third reason I couldn't write it was because of the same reason I couldn't sometimes leave, that I thought I could be killed. Not in the sense that my life particularly was in danger, but because I was in a hostile situation, I really did feel that once I pressed send on that publish button, I'm done for. On so many levels, because the little community I did have, I would lose, right? Because the one thing with that our mothers and aunts tell us is, do not air your dirty laundry in public. And if you do, we're done with you. So there was so much fear on those counts, but the biggest fear is the one, Mehtaji, that you are defining, which is that I felt that after I write this, the world is going to look at Yasser as a brown savage man to rescue me from. And that fear was very palpable because remember, I grew up in East Africa. I understood colonialism the way I understand it. And it was a little hard for me to kind of throw him to the dogs that way. And even in the publishing journey, I was told that would be much better had I left him. The book would do much better. So think about it. So I was constantly brought into this frame of, escape from the brown savage man. And I really wanted to challenge that because of the same reason that on one hand, women are not supposed to speak of anything that the men do that are wrong to us, whether it is not partaking in the emotional labor of the house, etc., because we are a global minority. right? And on the other hand, we are given this education and this truth-telling ability so that we should talk about the rights of the underdog. So there was this big tension where I am representing my community as a Pakistani, and remember that that is what I valued most. And then at the same time, I was representing something I felt was not okay. That I was the deliberate. I was the harm of which was pointed towards me. So in a way, I was like, is it selfish of me to come out and do this when we are a global minority, when the men in our communities are looked to be civilized, and as it is the narrative that Yasser talks about on Jinnah and secular Pakistan, etc., is a minority conversation. He's also a human rights lawyer for the Ahmadis in this country, who are always very persecuted. I was like, I'm going to jeopardize that as well, because anybody who now wants to pin him or stereotype him or typecast him will be like, look, he's a wife beater. Right? And I really did not want that. I did not want him to be defined as the aggressor. I did not want to have me defined as a victim. I wanted to walk that fine line, and the best way to do it was to just stick as close to the experience of mental health challenges as possible. So I talked about how I felt when something happened. I talked about what was done. And then he came and joined me and talked about what was done, how it played out, and what he feels about it. So I think that in doing that, we tried not to be the victim of the male white supremacist gaze. I hope that has happened, but maybe it didn't. I don't know. You tell me.
Thank you, Aisha. That was just wonderful. I just want to play a short video clip of one of our book club members, Anasuya, who is in the Hyderabad region on a retreat, and then we will come back and pass it on to Shudatta and anybody else.
Good evening, everyone. And Julie, thank you so much for asking me to share my explication on Heart Tantrums by Aisha-Sarwari. Yes, Heart Tantrums is actually a record of all kinds of tantrums. And tantrums of a misogynistic man called Yasser, who's Aisha's husband, and a description of the variety of abuse that he could impose upon Aisha. That being said, Aisha also talks about his verbal online abuse to other people on the online community where he used to share his views. And therefore, she was perhaps not the only person who was being abused. She was physically also abused, but the verbal abuse and insults were a part of his nature. And that came out through the entire story. I will talk about Aisha and her motivation for writing this book, which I somehow find questionable. And I will let anybody else talk about all the other features that she incorporates vis-a-vis the subcontinent's view about Pakistan, or what the Indian thinks about Pakistan, and all of that. I will not talk about all of that at the moment. However, throughout the narrative, what I found puzzling to me was, what was the compelling reason behind Aisha penning this memoir? She states various occasions of little matters which provoked huge violent reactions from Yasser. Over a period of a very long marriage, she learned very fast that there were so many red flags which she could avoid, but in spite of seeing those, she still persisted with her provocation and continuously brought harm towards herself. Even after becoming a mother, she couldn't stop this habit of hers of pressing those buttons on Yasser, which would trigger a violent reaction. The violence is witnessed by the members of his family. No one comes to help her. And she perseveres supposedly out of love for this man. And aside from what she has written in the book, I did explore her podcast where she was being interviewed about this book. And she stands with her husband. They discuss the entire situation, and somewhere there was a mismatch of motivation and the book. So in my view, an abused woman talking about the abuse she suffered would mean she was offering some kind of guidance to other women in similar situations and assisting them through her experience on how to fight it, get out, defend yourself, and all of those features. However, this takes on a very complex tone as you progress with the book, and it looks almost like the two are in a scripted game. And a feisty, educated, Western educated woman justifying her very misogynistic husband, that he was programmed from his Pakistani upbringing of patriarchy to abuse women who kind of didn't toe the line. And it was very puzzling to me, and I think in this matter the motivation needs to be questioned.
Thank you. Aisha, did you get to hear that?
Yes, I did. It was quite clear, and I could see the puzzle that she's trying to solve.
Okay, so if you want to, respond, you're welcome. Or if you want to think about it.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to respond.
Okay.
I think that is what the book is about. It is a puzzle, right? I mean, and I'm not here to solve it, and I'm not here to be the poster child or poster girl of, the right way to do feminism. Some of us can't run, and some of us don't want to run, or some of us feel like it's better not to run. And I think that there's this very white feminism way of the right way to do it, which is, you're harmed, you immediately restorative justice, usko hota hai, where you restore the harm where the other person has now exited your life. And again, let us not forget that this is not your run-of-the-mill crazy man who is a misogynist. There is a brain tumor involved, which is why the book has brain tumors in it. And that is what I want to focus on the fact that if there was no brain tumor, it would still be puzzling. But add a mental health component to it that is physically gone into his brain twice in surgery, removed a really large part of his brain while they were removing the tumor, given him anti-seizure meds that make him not himself, given him a cocktail of so many other medications that are not him. Think of your parent with dementia. Think of an older man with Parkinson's and atrophying of the brain. There's a science to it, and the puzzle is simply this: how can you hold somebody accountable when the medical science behind it cannot hold them accountable? Right. So that is the puzzle. As for my motivation, I think that things will feel scripted because it is an unnatural union. I mean, I think that 98% of people divorce or leave their partners once they have a mental health disorder of any kind, and this is a brain tumor. So I'm that perhaps 2 or 3% that is not yet on the other side, and I think that you don't know how you will react to something until you're in it. If I was 20 and somebody would tell me that I would, endure this and be in it, I would say, hell no. I was like a feisty young person, so am I still now, and I would judge the person in it, and I would say things about it. I mean, how we judge, I don't know, Hillary Clinton, for example. Everybody has commentary on how everybody else should behave. But there's something very strange that happens when you are in a particular situation. Suddenly, you have the ability to do whatever you want, and then how are you going to behave is quite interesting. So yes, I feel her puzzlement. I'm not going to disagree with her. It's the same feeling that I have about myself, and I said, like, I have a sense of self and I manufacture it. And when she was speaking, that was me speaking. I'm like, what am I doing? And there are days in which I have that, right? But then I look at his medicine kit, I'm also his caregiver, I look at his nursing work, and there is no way that it's as simple as restorative justice. There's a medical component here, which I think that perhaps we should remember.
Very large-hearted. One more question, Sudhata? Another avid reader.
But I'm sorry I haven't read your book, but something yet, yes. But there is something that I wanted to ask. What about, was all this a part of explaining things to your children? I mean, what was their part? They must have also seen you being, lambasted all around the place. So was that an inspiration for you to write this book, to explain that these things happen and this is a reality that happens to other people too?
Yeah, I think I wrote the book for my mom, mostly, because I feel like as the only living parent that I have, I hope that I did well by her. She's a woman with a lot of sense of courage, patience. She's very spiritual. She believes, whatever life hands to us, it's how we respond to it that matters. And she believes in the goodness of everybody, and that will ultimately suffice. So there are two parts of me. One is an angry daughter, where I'm throwing this book in her face and saying, you lied. That's not how the world works. And then there's another part of me that embraces her intelligence and wisdom and survival, and understands why she did what she did. And there was a lot of healing in that. Remember that I am this independent woman because I wanted to be everything that my mom wasn't. I didn't want a man to depend, I didn't want to depend on any man, because I was like, if you depend on a man, then if he's not kind to you, where are you going to go? But I am not dependent on a man, and the abuse can happen in any situation. And I think that it's sort of like my guidebook to myself, because there's both my mother and my daughters in me. And yes, my daughters did witness a lot of that, which I'm sure is going to be taking a toll on them, right? But I also reharnessed my sense of identity, my decision-making, my boundaries. So for example, moving away was a very important step in regaining my sense of calm, leaving the joint family system, deciding that I will call my own shots. All of these things happened in front of them. So they saw their mother be swept away of this meteor called mental health. They saw me, trying to save Yasser, and we tend to forget the fact that Yasser should have died by now. According to medical science, this book was supposed to be published afterwards, right? Because he had very few years to live. Now, thankfully, because of medical science, he's lived a little longer than we expected. And so the combinations and permutations of their father, which is never going to change, and who, by the way, is quite a loving father, and the challenges that they've seen me during nursing care go through, as well as the general disrespect that would happen very easily because I was, the punching bag, as most bahus are. So I think they already know. Every time your mother was sad, you knew, right? She didn't need to tell you. Yeah. She would tell you, no, it's nothing. Yeah, we absorb their sadness, whether they tell us or they don't tell us, whether they admit it to us or they don't admit it to us. So I thought, this would be a very hard read for them, but I felt they already know. So I just went ahead with it. And again, it was the only reconstruction tool that I had. Like I said, something happened to me. I underwent post-traumatic stress disorder. And the way to re-heal was words. I think they have an incredible capacity to just sense make and also I'm not wedded to the idea that the book should make sense. I don't know if that's counterintuitive, but it's not supposed to make sense. It's messy.
The other thing that interested me is what kind of backgrounds did you and your husband have? Were they similar? Were they, in Pakistan? I mean, there are different kind of, one can be middle class and we go to a Jesuit school, or go to an Urdu school or a madrasa. So their background. So what kind of backgrounds did you all have?
So I'm smiling because there's this movie called Two States, in which I think somebody from one state in India marries somebody from the other state in India, and I swear that a lot of it resonated because Punjabi culture, if you know anything about Punjabi culture, it is they don't take words seriously. Okay? They're going to call you all sorts of names and then say, "We didn't mean it. Come here, you're my John." So I'm not just talking about caste, I'm talking about the culture. The culture is very in your face. They do not believe in scheming. They do not believe in manipulation. They don't believe in, I'm going to play you. They just believe when we're angry, you're going to find out. And I came from a culture, very Urdu speaking culture, that too expatriates. So they became very dhima, they became very mellow, where words really mattered, where you weren't supposed to say anything you didn't mean. And if you said anything and you didn't mean it, you spent the rest of your life apologizing. So in a way, it was a massive clash of cultures, right? So there was that too, the shock of that. I thought and this was where I made a mistake. I stereotyped Pakistan into thinking that it's Karachi, where I'm from, and where my chachas are from. And I moved to Lahore and I found out there are so many Pakistans, from Gilgit-Baltistan to Sindh to Balochistan to Karachi to Lahore. It's just so different. We're so diverse in our ethnicities and our approach to life in words, and that the sensitivity in which I came into, mujhe wo feel bhi bahut zyada hua tha, you see. So I think I was sort of thrown into a storm.
Thank you so much. Aisha, I think we have imposed and superimposed on you, and you've just come up roses. Thank you so very much. And thanks to this wonderful readership and audience who loved every bit of it, I think. So until we meet again with your next book,
May I add one little anecdote? My dad would always wear a lungi to bed, and that was my little. And he always got them from Dhaka from his friends. So that little part is in the book, and so I thought I'd make that connection. And also, our neighbors in Uganda were from Bengal and Bangladesh, and my first piano song was taught to me by my Bangladeshi teacher, and so I know a few songs from there. But having said that, I just wanted to really thank the book club. I don't know, you guys are like some Illuminati smart people in a world that's going rogue. So thank you so much for letting me have a bit of a piece of it. I'm very honored. And thank you, Mavra, for linking me to you, Julie. I'm so honored.
Mavra, bless you, my dear. I will hand over the microphone to our library subcommittee chair, who's always supportive of anything that is insightful, perceptive like yours. So here you go, Mr. Partharanjan Das.
Thank you, Aisha, for a wonderful evening presenting to us, a wonderful evening. I have my personal take on this. I think when we read a book like this, I haven't gone through your book, but I have this to say that, books are written on personal experiences, but it's a creative expression of what you've gone through. It's not a biography, it's not news reporting. So, one should draw a line where, your personal life stops and a book starts. You see, unconsciously when you write a book, there are some conjectural elements, some, inspirational elements, and some bit of, your imagination will come through, and that makes a great book a great book. It's like making a film. I mean, when you read a book, one should not try to find your personal life in that book. It's a book. So one should draw that line. Like when we make a film on a book, Satyajit Ray once said that one should not try to find a book in a film. You have to take liberties. He famously said that in a book it's very easy to say that Ram was a nice boy. In a film, how do you show Ram is a nice boy? So you have to add, elements, you have to add stories, so you're deviating from the original story. So when you're writing a book like what Aisha did, you have to deviate to make it literature, make it a book. It's not a news reporting after all. So to that extent, Aisha, I must thank you, and what you talked about today, makes me curious to, read your book. And also thanks to Julie for bringing you here, and thanks to Choitali for asking all the right questions, and thank you Bengal Club for making this successful. Thank you all.
God bless Aisha, all the best. We'll stay in touch. We'll send you the recording. Thank you.
Bye. And goes without saying that Islamabad's your home. Whenever you're here, please, I'd love to host all of you at some point. Let's make a Bengal Book Club in Islamabad someday.
Yes, I have to second that as well.
Khuda Hafiz, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mavra. Thank you.